Coming in at this time allows me to be able to say a few things to you about what I've been up to with my team abroad in Guyana, and also I'm sure you may have one or two questions for me on matters which have not been in front of me for the last few days. As you may recall, I did tell you at an earlier time in a different press conference that the work program of the Office of the Prime Minister involved some very weighty matters at interactions abroad, starting with the energy conference in Guyana. I trust that you know by now that the energy conference in Port of Spain, which we've had a very successful one a few weeks ago, is now running neck and neck with the Trinidad and Tobago Energy Conference. In fact, it's in terms of volume of persons participating and breadth of international interest, the Guyanese Energy Conference is now probably a little ahead of us because of the new nature of the issues that we are dealing with and Guyana's entry into the hydrocarbon business in a big way. Guyana is now, as you know, exporting probably, 4 times as much oil as Trinidad and Tobago, and holding on to very interesting acreage. So the Guyanese Energy Conference is very important to the people of CARICOM and the people of Trinidad and Tobago in particular. You may recall also that 2 Septembers ago, we had the Summit of the Americas. And arising out of that summit, at the direction of President Biden, we had 2 committees operating, one on energy, actually 3 committees actually, one on energy and one on food security and the other on economic matters, financial matters. I co-chair the energy one, and as a result of that, I'm very involved in a lot of what is happening with respect to the governmental side of things which are happening in the CARICOM countries. The very pleasing thing at this conference I just came from is the very large footprint of Trinidad and Tobago in the Guyanese hydrocarbon industry. We always knew that we had strengths, even as our own acreage for oil and gas has been depleted. Over the decades, we have built up considerable expertise, which is now extremely valuable to Guyana and Suriname and other countries who are engaging in a way that we had engaged a long time ago, and who are now doing seismic work, logistical support work, and so on. So I was very pleased to see the very deep involvement of the Trinidad and Tobago support sector, the technical sector in Guyana's industry. And I also would like to invite the media in Trinidad and Tobago to visit Guyana, because there is something that is missing here in Trinidad and Tobago, and it comes out in our national conversation very frequently, especially from people who sometimes speak without being familiar with what they're talking about. And it is the scale of Guyana as a country and the scale of the activities in Guyana now and the scale of the potential that we are working with. And it is not only in oil and gas, it's also in agriculture. In fact, it stands out more starkly in agriculture. The production systems that we are working with under our policy and vision 25 by 25, which is to reduce the CARICOM food import bill by 25% by 2025. That is CARICOM target, and we're all working in various ways on that. But it's when you actually stand on the ground or fly over or drive through the infrastructure on the ground in Guyana, that you get a proper appreciation for what we here in Trinidad and Tobago can do, what our competitive advantage is, and how we are relating to other components of CARICOM. And I would like that to be better appreciated in Trinidad and Tobago, because a while ago I did say something about the scale at which we can engage in agriculture, simply because we are limited in size, and therefore we can't have the benefit of the scale being your main advantage. And it was interpreted that I said that we can't have agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, that is nonsense. We can have agriculture. As a matter of fact, as part of our contribution to the 20 by 25, we have moved our rice production from 100 acres to 1,000 acres. So far this season already, using rice seeds from Guyana for Trinidad and Tobago's rice industry to begin to produce more, we have already harvested 340 tons of rice, which we normally wouldn't have produced. So we are doing certain things here. We got from Guyana 500 coconut seedlings and getting another. We've ordered another batch. And sometime in early April, I'll invite you to see our first planting of vegetables under shade houses. That work is going on apace. We have something to show at this time, but I want to show you actually crops on, in the ground or in the substrate, wherever they are. So that's what we are doing here. And we are also trying to ensure that we are integrated in what is being done elsewhere. One of the things I also would like to see is the Trinidad and Tobago business sector being involved in the agribusiness in Guyana. Because there are people from all over the world who are there getting land in Guyana and Suriname and taking the opportunities. And it was raised at CARICOM with the private sector representatives that there's a certain element of disappointment that we have not seen our own private sector taking the risk, leading the charge to utilize the land that is available. For example, Suriname has made available probably, I think, 3,000 acres of land for CARICOM private sector people to come in, and land is available for agriculture. There has not been a single taker so far. So the excitement at the level of the political directorate is not mirrored by the private sector taking up these offers which were not on the table before. I did have the opportunity to visit some of the projects again. Last time I was in Guyana, I went to the Brazilian border, where in the town of Letem, in the Rupununi, where cattle and soya and corn and rice production, the possibilities, and there's a lot going on there. And this is an area that is much larger than our own national acreage. As the whole of Trinidad and Tobago can fit in there quite comfortably. And this time I was able to go to see other things. There's one cattle ranch I saw with cattle on it, but none of that meat comes to Trinidad and Tobago because we are still stuck in not importing meat from South America, even though Guyana has USDA clearance as being free from foot and mouth disease. We need to review that to ensure that we are not depriving ourselves of certain benefits by holding on to dated operations. We will have to review that to see whether, in fact, once the USDA conditions are met, that Trinidad and Tobago should not exclude itself from those possibilities. I know some technical person will tell me that, well, even though they have USDA clearance and beef is available for Trinidad and Tobago from Guyana, that that we may expose ourselves to foot and mouth. And if that is so, I will point out to such a person that those Trinidad and Tobago farmers in the south of Trinidad who are operating illegal smuggling, which is always legal, of Venezuelan cattle into Trinidad, they provide a greater risk for foot and mouth than USDA certified beef from Guyana. So we need to get serious about these matters, and I intend to instruct the Ministry of Agriculture to review this situation, both situations, the smuggling on the south coast of cattle and small ruminants, and also the certification of Guyanese beef for the Trinidad and Tobago market. So these are just some of the issues that we dealt with. On agriculture, all the CARICOM countries reported on what they have done and what they are doing within that context. And when you go to as a matter of fact, just about this time in Georgetown, the CARICOM press conference is taking place. I left a little ahead of the closure of the meeting. So that press conference is going to take place, and all the details of what I'm touching on here will be available in greater detail for those of you who would like to pursue these issues. On the question of the energy meeting, if we come back to that, we did have the opportunity of meeting and having some very interesting and informative discussions with a number of persons for whom Trinidad and Tobago is still being marketed as a place of great interest for the hydrocarbon industry, whether it has to do with gas, whether it has to do with the refinery, whether it has to do with the supply of refined products. Trinidad and Tobago is still a major player in the regional energy supply and security, and we still consider ourselves to be the energy hub in the region. So we had a lot of very interesting follow-ups, one of which has to do with the meetings we've had with the Saudis in the CARICOM Saudi summit that took place recently. I attended that, as you know, and on a bilateral basis, we do have very interesting discussions going on with the Saudis with respect to the role that they could play in funding certain developmental projects in Trinidad and Tobago. We discussed also the potential for CAL to play a role in making it easier for our citizens to go to Hajj directly from Trinidad and Tobago without going through Turkey and Venezuela and so on. We also had the question of our diplomatic presence in the Middle East. As you would have been told at an earlier time, we intended, after we closed our mission in Kampala, Uganda, we intended to put our presence in the Middle East because it was more beneficial at this point in time to do that. We did not affect that because certain developments had overtaken that in the geopolitical sphere. But arising out of the CARICOM Saudi summit, one of the biggest problems that we raised with the Saudis was the expense and difficulty in maintaining individual missions or any mission at all in the environment of Riyadh. And the Saudis responded to that by providing a CARICOM mission in Riyadh at their expense, which can be utilized by all the CARICOM countries. It would be accommodation designated for CARICOM, and CARICOM countries can actually then occupy it. Trinidad and Tobago intends to occupy our space there and to appoint the necessary personnel to represent us in Riyadh sometime soon. And we are also speaking with the Qataris, the Emirates, who are also present, and expressing the desire to deepen their cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago and the wider CARICOM. So there were a whole lot of discussions along those lines. We had high-level representations from a number of countries. I must say, though, that I have been around CARICOM and CARICOM meetings now for a number of years. And since we have taken the position that CARICOM must function as one voice, and that we are stronger together, and that no single entity in CARICOM is better off than the entity of CARICOM speaking for all of us, and going out of our way to cooperate so that we find consensus in a number of matters, it has come across that we are now far more effective in our diplomacy, in our mobilization of resources, and in our effect, both at home and abroad. It is arising out of this approach, which we have been preserving for the last few years, that we now have recognition from the African Union, where diplomatically we have the clout of being acknowledged and working with the African Union. So the whole force of the African nations, in fact, some countries have now identified a region called the diaspora and have invited us into their business, diplomatically and otherwise, to play a role which benefits us in very many ways. As, again, in that way, we find that when we get together, come to a position and put that position forward, that CARICOM is far more effective. For example, we discussed the situation in the Middle East, where there is a very gruesome war, some say genocide, taking place. Very many CARICOM countries, like Trinidad and Tobago, we reserved our position outside of the UN to make comments on the situation in the Middle East. But having gathered at CARICOM in Georgetown, Trinidad and Tobago was very engaged in taking the position with our CARICOM colleagues in making a very strong statement about the situation in the Middle East, where we have called for a ceasefire. We have called for support for the two-state initiatives, and we have called for cessation by Israel in grabbing Palestinian land, under the understanding that all of these actions will bring about peace and security, both for Israel and dignity and peace for the Palestinian people. So there's a strong CARICOM position that would be available in the next few minutes when you consult the CARICOM website. It's going to be at the press conference, and you will see that's one position we've taken as CARICOM. Then, of course, you would see Haiti, which is in a very terrible state and has been so for quite some time. And as you may know, Haiti is the largest, most populous CARICOM nation. But circumstances being what they are, following the assassination of President Moise, Haiti is now a country without a single elected official, and a president who is in office, as my colleague from St. Vincent put it, on the basis of dead left, because somebody said that the president was appointed because the president who was killed had said that he had intended to make this person prime minister. Now, that is no basis on which to determine that a country should be run, even with a hint of democracy being of concern. So this has been going on for the longest while. Gangs have taken over most of the country. Gangs have taken over some of the major lifelines of the country, the port, 3/4 of the city, and so on, and you would have been seeing the reports of all kinds of abuse and violations. So therefore, in CARICOM, we have this situation where there's no democracy, there's no government. and there's no pathway to an election in Haiti. So CARICOM is taking this on, but I just want to remind the members of the media, as you critique this situation, that CARICOM was not involved in any way with the selection of a prime minister for Haiti when the assassination took place. Those who assumed responsibility for Haiti then, and I'm speaking here specifically about the United States, Canada, and the EU, they got together, they assumed responsibility, and they appointed the Prime Minister of Haiti. The situation has worsened, has gone virtually beyond recall, and CARICOM has been saying to them, as we have said in this meeting where there were high-level members of the Canadian government at ministerial level, the United States government, cabinet level, and the EU, we have said to them that the situation in Haiti cannot and must not be left to CARICOM, must not be left on its own, and that they have a serious responsibility which must be discharged to bring about some amelioration of the difficulties that exist in Haiti, and most importantly, to encourage cooperation from the present government towards accepting a pathway to elections in some reasonable time frame. You will see, when you consult the website, the CARICOM statement on Haiti. It is very clear. We ask that the Haitian constitution, if not in letter, but in spirit, be observed, in that a prime minister in Haiti ought to have some oversight body to which the prime minister will be responsible, and we've recommended the creation of a council of some kind that would mirror the presidency, which doesn't exist, and that would be a body, that council should be able to absorb more people into it for broader representation, the opposition being an integral part of it. We trust that the opposition too will see the requirement to cooperate, to create an entity that would agree with all the stakeholders on a pathway to elections in Haiti sometime within the next 18 months or thereabout. Because the absence of any intention to go to an election is more than an embarrassment to all of us, not just CARICOM, but all the developed countries that attempted to deal with the crisis that arose after President Moïse was assassinated. And that is a problem. That is a problem inside of CARICOM. And CARICOM has taken responsibility for being out front and being seen to have a position on it, rather than simply acquiescing to what is going on. One of the major use our time in this conference had to do with crime and security. Every single CARICOM country had that as a #1 item. Interestingly enough, this was discussed at this major gathering of CARICOM, which probably I would say might be, in terms of number of contact hours, the meeting lasted from Sunday to Wednesday. Normally we meet for 2 days. The meeting also had the participation of a large number of external delegations at very high levels. That is not normal. And as I left there this afternoon, I left just ahead of the arrival of, well, at the time of the arrival of President Lula, who was the last contact that we had of Brazil. And the meeting would end on that note, but because of my prior arrangements, I couldn't stay on for that part of the meeting, but Minister Brown is there representing Trinidad and Tobago. But the fact that I would say this was probably the main CARICOM meeting in the last 2 decades should tell you that something is happening and we are having an effect. But with respect to crime and security, this document is what report on the crime and security for the period July to December 2023, presented by Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And I did that in the context of, there's a kind of a quasi-cabinet in CARICOM where President Ali is responsible for agriculture. I'm responsible for regional security. Mr. Motley is responsible for finance and the economy and so on. This document reported on what the Caribbean region and our regional institutions interacting with governmental bodies have been doing. And I just want to quote a little bit of it for you, because it is rooted in the symposium that we had in Trinidad and Tobago in April of last year, where the CARICOM bodies declared violent crime as a public health issue. And every CARICOM country is focusing on that and seeing what we are required to do to bring about a proper response to this upsurge and sustained violent society that we are in fact experiencing. The report speaks about the last quarter of 2023, where with financial support from the United States Department of State, because you see, we did invite the United States and Canada to work with us on this issue of attempting to smother the violent crime upsurge. We in CARICOM believe that we cannot fight this without the cooperation of these people, especially the United States, because the United States is the source of much of the problem, the guns and the ammunition, and the loose way with which these items are available in the United States for onward transmission to Trinidad and Tobago and other CARICOM countries. We had to engage the United States. 3 or 4 countries reported that they are already this year at record levels of murders as compared to the recent past. Bahamas, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, and of course we know Jamaica has this ongoing problem as well. So we had the United States Department of State engaged in April, and in fact, subsequent to that, there was a technical workshop in October that was held in Barbados, and that had to do with establishing a steering committee which was supported by the European Union. So we do have support from a number of agencies, entities, and countries at the technical level in trying to improve our response, mainly dealing with the quality of our security services. Because it does not matter how often we speak about the horrors of the crimes and the behavior of the criminals, the response has to come from the quality of our security response, our security services. So these countries have been working with us on that. And of course, when we look at the outcome, we see that high up on the list is reduced access to assault weapons. And it speaks directly to mitigating the epidemic of the availability of small arms used in illegal activities, to directly reduce the rate of homicide. That is where a lot of the focus is, trying to deprive the criminals of a supply of arms and ammunition. And within CARICOM, there's a general partnership of a number of CARICOM agencies, all of whom are focusing on this issue of violent crime and violence as a public health issue. And so to that effect, we have CARFA working with us, CARICOM Impacts, University of the West Indies, and they're doing the relative surveys and feeding it back into the CARICOM Secretariat. And the report to the, on the question of fighting against illicit trafficking in arms, this was the report that came to CARICOM from what we have been doing at that level. And it says, the threat posed by illicit trade in firearms in CARICOM remains very high, and in many countries, the acquisition of and use of high-powered weapons have increased. This is the CARICOM position. With the operational establishment of the Crime Gun Intelligence Unit, because we did form that last year, a Crime Gun Intelligence Unit, there has been an increase of information and intelligence sharing between the authorities in CARICOM member states and the United States of America, and the establishment of trends through information and greater awareness in dealing with trafficking in what we call crime guns, which is guns occupied illegally, obtained illegally, and being used to commit crimes in the country. The Crime Gun Intelligence Unit, which involves CARICOM and United States assets, have undertaken and are continuing to undertake the following activities. We did have an operation called Operation Hammerhead. This operation had as its primary objective the interdiction of firearms moving into Trinidad and Tobago and the wider region, as well as the effective disruption and acquisition of pertinent operational intelligence to strategically reduce illicit trade of weapons across the Caribbean. It was a 3-week exercise that we did, and this exercise started on the 11th of September 2023, and it was largely encouraged and driven from Homeland Security United States. And that agency, working alongside CARICOM Impacts, we had some interactions and sharing of personnel and data with various task forces from the United States. And while the operation has been completed, activities have been normalized and continue remotely for the region. And based on the continued activities as of 10th January 2024, we can tell you the following. This approach, this activity, in conjunction with the U.S. authorities and their agencies, we have assessed 600,000 packages that were destined for CARICOM. 600,000 packages have been given increased scrutiny. Of that, 4,600 were deemed to require enhanced inspection. 4,600 items heading our way that required greater attention. Out of that exercise came the seizure of 318 firearms, 348 magazines, and 19,270 rounds of ammunition heading our way, more than likely would have landed in our territories without this exercise. And one can only envisage what that would have added to the horror that we are already experiencing. As a result of that exercise and the way we've gone ahead as of January, we initiated and supported 25 international firearms trafficking cases, and indictments and arrests are anticipated for several persons in the United States. So the point we're making here is that there is a positive outcome to be had by working alongside the United States at the source end of the supply of the guns and the ammunition. Because those figures I call out to you there, that is not what we picked up here, or even the water. At that other end, that was destined for us. And we also have been working quite hard on training to improve the quality of our personnel. One of the reports that we've had, both at home and abroad, is the high failure rate of our personnel when tested to measure up to the kind of standards that we require if we are going to have the quality of security service that is required to respond to this. And in collaboration with Impacts and the other entities, we're being told by Impacts that the threat posed by unsecured weapons and obsolete weapons is a serious one within our borders. And we in Trinidad and Tobago have completed our assessment of those kinds of weapons that exist in the country and would be clearing out much of them because our exercise is over. The other countries like Bahamas, Guyana, St. Lucia, and Suriname, they too are now doing that, which is trying to reduce the threat from unsecured weapons and obsolete weapons which exist in the country. And this is being funded first by the government of the United Kingdom. And of course, there are still challenges such as countries needing to increase their levels of firearm tracing, as well as the technical skills to establish the serial number on firearms, that restoration of serial numbers, evidence handling, crime scene investigation, and firearm components parts training. All of these are things that we have to increase our ability to deal with if we are to effectively respond to the threat that arms and ammunition pose to our populations. And this, I can say to you, there isn't a CARICOM country that you can speak to who could tell you that they're so sorry for Trinidad and Tobago because of our crime wave and our violent crime, because they too not experiencing it. It's a phenomenon that runs from Suriname to the Bahamas. We are all working on it together. It requires a relentless, sustained approach. It requires cooperation with our allies. It requires the sharing of information. It requires the collection of information. It requires the execution by honest police officers and other security aspects of the state machinery. So we are there, and we are doing a lot of that. The last thing we dealt with this morning, which wasn't on, we kind of had a late return to the work we had done a couple of days ago on the CSME, the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, that thing we always talked about. But I can tell you today, if I may quote the Prime Minister of Barbados, whose responsibility it is to drive and report on our progress or lack thereof with the Caribbean Single Market and Economy. If I may quote the Prime Minister of Barbados, it has now been accepted by CARICOM heads that the progress we want to make, that we could make on the desired CARICOM Single Market and Economy will not be had without a greater involvement and success in the area of freedom of movement. And I dare say we can add to that the removal of internal tariff barriers within CARICOM. Those of you who noticed and participated in our 50th anniversary of independence must now consider whether what we saw at the 50th anniversary, which is the outcome of our founding fathers who bit the bullet, took the risk of creating CARICOM, and we celebrated 50 years of its existence. Whether we are now prepared, those of us who are in office today and those of us who are alive today and those of us who are required to sustain CARICOM going forward for the next 50 or 100 years, whether we are prepared to do what has to be done or continue to vacillate and pussyfoot and kick the can down the road, hoping that we are not called upon to pick it up. By all of that, I mean, are we ready to do what Dominica has put to CARICOM, which CARICOM has accepted? And that is that come the end of March of this year, end of this March in front of us, that we should ensure that our attorneys general conclude the exercises that are required to ensure that there can be freedom of movement under conditions spelled out by CARICOM in such a way that a certain amount of the rights and privileges that are entrenched in the Treaty of Chaguaramas can be operationalized. And in addition to that, to accept a time frame within which, whether it is 7 years or 10 years, that the full freedom of movement with the access to all rights and privileges within all CARICOM territories be available to all CARICOM citizens. We have agreed that enough work has been done. There is a group within the CARICOM Secretariat with legal support and the decisions of previous CARICOM meetings and the attempt to further deepen our economic activities, that a meeting is to be had between all the attorneys general to finalize this work, which is on the cusp of being finalized, and that one very special day to be announced, that all the CARICOM governments, having accepted the legal work to bring about this improved access and movement, and the commitment to move forward to a date where these barriers will be removed, that all the governments of CARICOM will go to their parliaments on the same day and pass the necessary legislation to bring this about. That is where we are today. And this meeting in Georgetown, which I would say is probably one of the most historic ones, has taken this decision. And the question is, do we have what it takes to get it done, or do we vacillate for another 50 years? I will take some questions from you now if you have them. Yes, just identify yourself as usual and put your question. And let's take the questions one at a time, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister, Minister Imbert. Kimbo Dram from The Express. I would want to ask whether there was any discussion on the oil incident or hydrocarbon incident in Tobago, and you know, if anything at all was said about that, and also given that you are head of the NSC, if there is any update that has either come to you that you're looking forward to or that you can share regarding the vessels themselves that were involved in that spill, you know, where they originated, their owners, and the consequences of that incident. Thank you.
Yes, the incident was widely known by my colleagues, and many persons did raise it. We did raise it in our discussions as one of the type of incident that we are exposed to, because as you know, as I said, I mean, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Barbados, Grenada, we are all engaged in exploration for hydrocarbon, and we all use the waters around us for transport of hydrocarbons for ourselves and for others. We have international waterways close to and through our territorial waters. So oil spills are a risk that we live with. We did report on what we have done, where we are at, and we suffered some significant damage. And as you know, we are taking steps to treat with it. With respect to finding out who is involved, the wreck that is on our territory so far has no owner. Whoever cut it loose or who lost it in the ocean, you know, there are certain kinds of laws that cover that. if you lose something in the ocean, it becomes a wreck and it becomes available to Tom, Dick, and Harry. But the vessel that was doing the towing, I don't know that we found that vessel yet. But we did get information in Guyana with respect to who was involved in importing a cargo. That information has been shared back here in Trinidad and Tobago. And whether the cargo that is lost, that fouled our shores, is the cargo that they were importing is yet to be finally confirmed. However, there is no liability on the part of Guyana for cargo that was destined for Guyana, even if it has turned out to be their cargo, because the cargo was lost on the high seas. So the one area that we are to pursue is who was in fact transporting the cargo, and to determine what liabilities exist there, if we can find that person. Because if it was the cargo, one has to determine it. And of course, if it was not the cargo, because you know, I think the name of the vessel is shared by 300 vessels. So all these complications exist. And once whoever cut it loose in the ocean doesn't show up, it is a complicated exercise to chase that down and to determine that you have a liability and to confirm that and take it to a court of law and so on. So it's a complex matter. Right now we are focusing on ensuring that the pollutant has minimal effect on our coastline. And Minister Young would have spoken to you all about what we've done so far. We've obtained international help, and we have a plan of action which is being executed, and the cleanup is taking place in Tobago. So I can't tell you much more than that, except that we did find out who was importing a cargo like that, and whether we determine that that was the cargo or not is another story. But it does not create a liability at CARICOM or in Guyana.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, Minister. Kimmery Fletcher, Guardian Media Limited. You mentioned that crime, of course, was a #1 topic for Trinidad and Tobago and all CARICOM neighbors. And it's, of course, crime continues to be on everyone's lips locally as well. While you were away as well, we've seen crime affecting the nation's children. We've seen whether it's a killing through to a drive-by in Laventille or a stabbing of a child in Tobago. I mean, what are your thoughts on crime and the security of our children, even dead bodies right outside schools, things and so forth? And also, you mentioned the report. What is being done on the local level in terms of any sort of discussion, strategies with Commissioner of Police as well as the Minister of National Security?
Well, as the crime escalates in the country, these incidents get closer and closer to each and every one of us. That is a fact that we can't get away from. And whether I am here or I am not here, those who take the decision to commit crime, they're proceeding apace. And we have to keep adjusting and strengthening our ability to respond. There are some initiatives that will be coming our way in the very near future, which we believe might be able to involve and protect the most vulnerable, our children. And that does not allow us to escape the fact that some of that violence is inside of the school too. That's another one of the stories we have. And one of the things that was discussed at this CARICOM meeting, arising out of some actions that a couple of governments had taken, was the kind of indoctrination that is taking place from the art form that many of our young people are exposed to, where violence is glorified and encouraged within the confines of the home or the schools. But the trauma and the pain that we face when we lose our young people, children at school age or children at school having to see the outcomes of violent crime, murder, beatings. Again, it was raised. The Prime Minister of St. Kitts is an expert in this matter, and he raised the whole question of the violence that children are exposed to within the home. I speak here about domestic violence, because many of these criminals come from a home somewhere. and the violence that they take without any aspect of moral consideration before they pull the trigger that kills somebody that makes the news. Dr. Drew spoke about a child who's damaged being a dangerous child. And by damage, he means a child who has experienced or is experiencing violence within the home, or who is being brought up without any semblance of what we call loosely training of values. That is a dangerous person. And unfortunately, those instances are becoming more and more plentiful in our society. And he gave the CARICOM heads a discourse on this matter, taking us right back to the question of crime as a public health issue. So we can all understand the trauma of the family when an incident takes place. But I want us to understand that this is not an isolated action. It's not an isolated thing. It's an isolated outcome on that occasion, in that location. But the problem is far larger and more complex. And we have to do, one of the things the government is going to be asked to consider very soon is the establishment of some kind of commission to deal with the involvement of families, where families can get help, can play a role in being more effective in raising children, because what we are taking for granted is no longer there. In an earlier time, the parenting of children by parents and grandparents and the society and the villages and the towns, that was sufficient to bring them up with a certain amount of perspective. That is no longer to be assumed to be there. And therefore, a wider and larger effort is required, because that is a requirement. The bringing up of our children is a requirement if we are to overcome this period of violence and violent crime that so traumatizes us on a daily basis. One of the ways that we can do that, again, this is being thought through to come to some policy position, is the utilization of our school plans. We have a number of schools across this country, which after 3 o'clock, the door is locked until the next school morning, whenever that is. The society can begin to make use of these premises, involving the teachers, the parent teachers, the communities, and volunteers of one kind or the other, with significant government support, to bring about the kind of dialogue, the kind of engagement, the kind of contact hours with young people and with older people, with professionals and non-professionals, to create a society where the concern against crime is not just a handful of politicians trying to make politics out of it, but a society that's trying to save itself.
Prime Minister, as you mentioned, the art form, we have these, I think it was even the Ghanaian minister mentioned having positive music only, and we are seeing that a lot of music that we have now with a negative influence, promoting different things. What are your thoughts on that affecting crime and particularly influencing our youth in the country? We even had one of our, an artist, we put off a flight, heading to a Caribbean island, and that's because of the music that he promotes. I believe it was K-Man 6 or something like that is his name. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the general consensus is that art, including music, has an effect on the human form and the human condition. And if the expression of that art, that music, is one that promotes and glorifies negative in the form of violence, then clearly it ought to be condemned. We discussed it at length, but we make a distinction between condemning it and banning it, because we believe that to talk about bans, to ban something, is simply to make it more attractive to those who would want to use it. And also ineffective in today's technological world You can't ban something like that because you might say you don't want it on TTT, you don't want it in a public space, but social media will make sure it's available to all who want it. And that's one of the difficulties that the current world faces. There was a time if you say don't print it in the newspaper, that's the end of that. But now everybody's a publisher. So that is the dilemma that we are in. But to condemn art form that is appealing to the basis and to the derelict nature and appealing to our worst condition, especially if it is to encourage violence as an act to participate in, and of course, the denigration of women, as some of those lyrics are, then clearly we don't shy away from condemnation, while we do not think that attempting to ban, but we can restrict in public spaces and on public airwaves certain kinds of tasteless, so-called genre. And we just have to be realistic. What is happening? What exactly is happening? And not be afraid to say, we accept or we don't accept. And that is why I'm saying that the contact and the engagement of young people where they are is now to be a priority for the Ministry of Education and the use of our facilities in positive contact. And also I would go further, that those who are in the music business, who understand that damage can be done there, they may be able to help with respect to put it simply, cleaning up the lyrics.
Prime Minister, sorry, Joel Brown here, TV6 News. Just to follow up on that point, you mentioned restriction. Where's the line between restricting and banning, and how do you balance that in the context of constitutional rights, such as freedom of expression?
That is precisely why I said that we have not talked about banning. We have not talked about banning, but I'm sure there is a place for good taste and acceptable conduct. It is your right to go down the road, right? But if you walk down the road naked, you would meet a law that says, no, sir, go put on some clothes, right? So we already have that restriction. I mean, you might think that certain kinds of verbal expressions sound very effective, but there's a law against obscene language, isn't there? So I'm not talking about anything new here. I'm talking about putting something in effect. To say no to something or to say yes is fashionable and a money spinner. But the effect of it is to poison the behavior and the character of our young people. I think parents and communities could condemn that without fear of being accused by people who are reasonable with respect to the fundamental rights and freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution.
Just also on the issue of what CARICOM would have announced last year, if I'm not mistaken, the issue of a ban on assault-styled weapons within CARICOM. Any progress on that particular initiative?
Yeah, the Attorney Generals, I mentioned a while ago that CARICOM is corralling the Attorneys General to get on with it and bring it to a point where the parliaments can deal with it. That is one of them. The CARICOM arrest treaty, the CARICOM arrest warrant, that's another one. So those things, the meeting said that this month of March, all attorneys general be put on notice that you are required to put your country in a position for the parliament to act.
Just one other thing, you mentioned discussions, among the discussions, in terms of energy security issue, you mentioned the refinery. And I'm just wondering if, let's say, you had any bilateral discussions with, say, Guyana or Suriname on the issue of their oil and the potential of refining at the mothballed refinery in Pointe-à-Pitre in Trinidad.
Yeah, we keep this issue out front all the time. In fact, one of the things we do when we go to these big gatherings where a lot of people are who are in the business, we keep it up front. Because you must remember, the reason why our refinery has been taken out of operation is because there was not an adequate supply of oil from our own sources, and that our purchasing of oil and attempting to be a refiner of other people's oil was a big money loser in Trinidad and Tobago. Those are the 2 points that caused us to come out of the business. So we always hold it out in hope that someone with access to oil or someone who wants to get into the refining business to be a refiner, which is predicated on a supply of oil that they may have, those discussions are always with us. And we did have some of it in Georgetown. In fact, there's one party, having heard us, has gone off to put things in place to come and look at our data room, because we maintain a data room at Pointe-a-Pierre, Guacara. So any person who may be interested, all the information they need is in the data room. So they can come to the data room, have a look at it. So having heard us, we have at least one interested party who has indicated an interest in going to the data room sometime in the next week or two. And of course, if they think that there are opportunities to talk to us further, they will. But I don't want to come and give you the impression that, because there's a group of people who live by talking about the refinery in a context that is completely divorced from reality or common sense. But suffice it to say that we still think the refinery is valuable. It is available for use, but it requires a sustained supply of crude.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister,
Good
Minister
afternoon.
Imbert. Ayana Carter from TTT News. I know that there was talk about the regional ferry that is supposed to be starting between Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados. There was also possible talk of Suriname joining that route. Can you give any further detail on that?
Yes, this was a major part of our discussion because there's tremendous interest in this initiative. And the pilot project using the Galleon Passage from Trinidad and Tobago, that has found a lot of favor, but that is not going to make a ferry service, one small vessel like that. We did discuss it and agree that the governments of the southern part of CARICOM, even those who are not already in, have indicated a willingness to be in. Grenada has now said they want to be in, and of course Suriname has said that they want to be in. So clearly there's something there. So as of now, Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Grenada, St. Vincent, if we look at a cargo ferry service in that situation, clearly one vessel or even two vessels wouldn't do it. So we're now committing to, we have to find the appropriate vessels. Since the idea is found to be one that we want to bring reality to, we can't just rely on one vessel from Trinidad and Tobago as a pilot project. We're looking further now at getting appropriate vessels, because for it to get the full benefit, the service has to be sustainable. For example, in Guyana, there is now talk and approaching the point of being able to export large volumes of corn and soya produced within CARICOM in southern Guyana, or even coming to us from northern Brazil. This is a new source of raw material that we import a lot of from Canada and the United States and elsewhere into our animal feed. That food bill that we talk about a lot, most of you really don't know that that food bill is largely the inputs into animal feed. One of the biggest single components is the input into animal feed. We're self-sufficient in chicken, but those chickens are fed with raw materials from outside, corn and soya base. So if that is to be produced in Guyana, we have to, and to be manufactured in Trinidad and Tobago. The creation of feed here to feed our animals here, then we have to have a cargo ferry that will bring significant volumes from Guyana to Trinidad and Tobago on a sustained basis. Right now, a bridge is being built between Guyana and Suriname that will allow heavy truck transport into Guyana and also from Brazil. Northern Brazil, the state of Roraima. The last time I spoke to you when we had a Guyana meeting, I told you about the relationship between Roraima and CARICOM. And when we had our CARICOM Agri Expo here, you may recall that there was a major Brazilian delegation here. They produce large volumes of these materials across the border. But there's no bridge coming into CARICOM. And I mean a physical bridge on the road. I traveled on a road in Guyana last Thursday, where I went over 41 new bridges. The road is not yet built. It's still a dirt road. But 41 bridges are being built on that road. When that road is completed, then it will allow raw materials being produced in southern Guyana and one more bridge across the river into Brazil to come by road all the way to Georgetown or somewhere else, which will allow that raw material to flow into CARICOM. Trinidad and Tobago has a record, and we stand about head and shoulder above all the rest as manufacturers. So we don't want to lose that position. So even though we don't have the acreage to produce the large volumes of the raw material, we have the equipment and the know-how and the expertise to use that raw material to maintain manufacturing and export in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's what's going on. But as I told you before, you have to understand the scale. Driving along this road, we're talking about, I said, a 6-hour drive. It's a 6-hour drive. So big and bad in Trinidad and Tobago, 6 hours to go around the country here 5 times. In Guyana, you haven't got your destination yet. But if the road is there, and Guyana is investing in the road, investing in the bridges, with the expectation to pour out the produce that is already available in that part of the country. So these are the things that CARICOM is dealing with now, and we are having to take the decisions to make these visions a reality.
Also, Prime Minister, when do you think that the public will know the new information regarding the Tobago wreck that you just spoke
The Tobago?
about? The wreckage in Tobago, the barge.
I couldn't give you that answer until I talked to the Ministry of Energy, but what I do know is that with the assistance of BP, we have found and we've brought in the expertise to take the action that is required. I haven't spoken to anybody in Tobago for the last 3 or 4 or 5 days. The oil has to come out of what's from the vessel, and then the vessel has to be righted because it's upside down. That all the decisions to do that, we found the expertise to do it, and the Ministry of Energy had a press conference, I think, in Tobago. Minister Young spoke to it. So that is the work program that's underway now. So I couldn't tell you which day until I'm briefed from them there.
Prime Minister, you spoke about the cargo ferries. What about passenger ferries? Because there's a demand for the ease of regional travel.
Yes, I think they go hand in hand, but first and foremost is the cargo ferry. And another point I want to make, we do not want to, and we do not intend to run this service as a government service. We intend to engage the private sector in a big way in getting this done. The government's role, again, this came up and we've taken some decisions on this. The government's role is to create the enabling environment where the transport of goods between these 6 countries I just mentioned should be done within a single economic space. Meaning, if you're shipping from a container from Suriname through Guyana to end up in St. Vincent or in Barbados or Port of Spain, once the shipment is made, it must be deemed to be going intra and not having to cross 5-6 borders with 5-6 customs. We want a single custom space, a single documentation from one of these countries should be good enough to land it in another country within the group. To do that, we have to change some laws, we have to make some agreements, but that is what is required if it is going to work. And the CARICOM must be prepared to make those decisions, adjust the laws to suit them, and carry it out.
Mr. Just going back quickly to freedom of movement. You're speaking about the day when everyone could go on the same day to carry it before Parliament, and if we're capable of doing this. So I have to ask the question, does this require opposition support, and how confident are you that this will?
Most of these kinds of, well, any amendment to the CARICOM Treaty, I don't want to play any lawyer here. It's a good question. It's a very good question. But most of it can be done with a government majority. But some of it would require more than that. But I would hope, even if it can be done with a simple majority, that the parliament of the country understands that whether you sit in the opposition or in the government, that this is something that we must get done because it is our effort as a country. If we keep dividing our effort between who could vote for it and who wouldn't vote for it, then we'll be cutting our throat with a dull razor. This kind of thing requires parliamentarians, all 41 of us, and parliamentarians in other parliaments in the region to understand that this is not politics to win seats and to win votes. This is whether we will survive as a CARICOM nation.
Sir, just a quick update. You spoke about the 100 million a couple months ago, weeks ago, 100 million to support the certain communities. What's the update on that?
We are still considering how that money should be spent and what should be spent on. One of the things I just mentioned there, this question about the Families Commission, we're getting families involved. They would need some resources to get that going, and some of that money will go into that, community by community. And a lot of people are going to be invited to participate. And so I would say by the end of this month, March, we should have a clear picture as to what's going to happen there. And I invite the national community, wherever you are, if you could play any role in these communities, whether it is mentoring, whether it is in assisting in management of facilities, whether it is in management of sport, it's going to be a wide canvas on which we hope to paint success.
Mr. What are your thoughts on the falling out between the UNC and the NTA?
Have they? Don't let them fool you. That's their very nature. We're focusing on the PNM, and I'm sure that as we in the PNM say, we are held to a higher standard, and we trust that we will live up to those standards because God knows Trinidad and Tobago needs the PNM. Thank you very much.